Who the Wild Things Are with Ryan McGuire.
You gotta listen to your body.
Oh my God, maybe, I could get out there, I could do this.
Let's take a ride, find your wild side, real stories, see with your own eyes.
It's so beautiful.
I'm gonna have the best time out here.
I was in tears. I was like, that's the best, man.
Welcome back to Who the Wild Things Are. My name is Ryan McGuire, and I'm here to bring you conversations with the most wild folks on the planet. If you're enjoying the podcast, please leave us a rating and review on your podcast platform of choice. And if you enjoyed the episode, share it with a friend. Appreciate you guys. Let's get it going. Well, this is definitely kind of a dream come true for me to have you on here. I've been listening to your stories for a long time, and just really excited that you decided to spend the afternoon with me.
For sure, man. Yeah.
So how's the new shoe coming?
Good. It's out in the world. It's pretty good. People seem to like it. I love it. There's two of them. There's a trail shoe and a road shoe. And I've been kind of switching them back and forth, wearing both of them a lot. I'm actually going to go out this morning for a trail run in the road shoe just because I kind of like the road shoe on the trails.
Yeah, I like a shoe that like a road shoe that can still handle trails. That's kind of my sweet spot.
Yeah, especially for rocks, shoes with lugs aren't really that good on stone, and a lot of trails, like where you really want it, like listen, I can handle mud one way or the other, but where I really want some traction is on stone, particularly coming downhill on those big slabs. And so a good road shoe is actually, it's designed to grab on slippery asphalt, so it works just as well on slippery rocks.
Cool. Well, I'm definitely planning on testing out the Zero shoes before you know it.
Yeah, man.
That's my next purchase.
All right.
So, Chris, I think a lot of people kind of know you now as the Born to Run guy, but I think it would be interesting to kind of hear about how all this started. I'm curious just to hit square one. Where was Christopher Mcdougall before running was even in the picture?
Well, I could take it back quite a ways, but I'll try and hit a couple of good timeline points. And I think the main one was out of college, I was an English major, and the first job I got was as an English teacher in a high school. And I realized probably within minutes, this was a big mistake because I never really liked being in school. I would get by in school because I was pretty good at like kind of thinking on my feet, making up bullshit answers, improvising, like reading the room and sort of picking up from what other people were saying, what answers were. So I basically just kind of faked my way through school. But I like to read, like that was my thing. So then I get out of college and like, all right, English major, English teacher, but I hated it. I just hated being in a classroom. And so as soon as that year ended, I bolted for Europe with some buddies. And I was getting my teacher pay through the summer. So I was living off of teacher pay and just backpacking around Europe and got to Spain and liked it and stayed there and started finding odd jobs. I was a scene shifter for a theater company. I was a warehouse dude, got some work teaching English, and eventually was able to, again, rely on that same fake it till you make it thing that I had honed back in high school. I got a job as a reporter for the Associated Press. They were hiring people who spoke the language and had some ability to write a little bit. So I got a job at the Associated Press and ended up becoming an overseas correspondent for the Associated Press. Held that job for a bunch of years, which was kind of my sweet spot because it is a job that is like custom made for acute ADHD. Like if you can't sit still, if you can't focus for more than 30 minutes, get a job as a foreign correspondent because you're all over the place. I ended up going from Madrid over to Lisbon, and I was the Lisbon correspondent, and then in Africa, so I was covering conflicts in Africa, politics, news, and sports in Portugal and Spain. banged around doing that. Running was nowhere on my radar. I was a big dude. I'd been a basketball player and rower. So the idea of like doing long, slow distance did not appeal to me at all. And when I did, I got hurt. And so my sort of future to me was going to be bopping from one story to the next. I went from news into magazine writing. And that's where I kind of was until I heard about this tribe in Mexico. I thought I'll scoot on down there, do a quick in and out story for Runner's World about this, unknown tribe. And what happened was one of those illuminating light bulb moments when you realize, oh, the world does not work the way you think it does. Things are different. And to me, that revelation was everything I'd always been told about the sport of running was bullshit. It was just wrong. It was just make-believe. It was just marketing. And that may not seem like a big deal, but to me it was a big deal because, I had written a lot for Runner's World, and the same kind of things I had repeated as like gospel truths. You got to have the right kind of shoes. You have to go to a running specialty store and have your gait analyzed. You need your motion control or stability. Pronation is bad. Change your shoes every 300 to 500 miles. Don't change your natural gait. Everybody runs differently, so use your own like natural gait. Don't try to change your gait. All these things. Oh, and then running's bad for you. Running's basically bad for the body. The most you can hope for is to minimize the damage, but it's like falling off of a roof. You're going to hit the ground. And all you can do is hope for the best. But you are going to hit the ground, it's going to hurt. And that essentially was the attitude around running, which is that this is bad for the body, it's bad for the knees, you're going to get arthritis, you're going to have injuries. And all you can do is hope that you can keep these things at bay as long as possible. But then, I spent time in the Copper Canyon, and I just see one thing after the other that is completely the opposite of this. And it makes me realize, oh no, everybody is just regurgitating the same nonsense.
Yep.
And that's what got me intrigued. It wasn't the running that got me intrigued. It was the kind of challenging of received wisdom. Because I kept thinking, boy, if this is all bullshit, like what else is bullshit? Like what else is out there that we're being sold on?
It's incredible now too, just in the last few years, you're mentioning, it was just damage mitigation, but now it's even to the point where osteoporosis doctors are prescribing long distance running to increase bone density. And like 10 years ago, that would have been the most anti-medical advice that you could possibly receive.
Yeah. I tell you, Ryan, it's if you start to become aware of the wellness and fitness trends, you start to see the cycle, which is that on a 10-year basis, everything that is carved in stone today will be reversed in 10 years. I grew up in the 70s and 80s where do not eat eggs, stay away from red meat, fat is bad. And then like, oh no, sorry, we were completely wrong about all that stuff. I grew up, when sugared cereals were okay. Every breakfast table had a selection of sugared cereals because those were okay because they were fortified with vitamins. They were a bowl full of sugar, So I think where this has led me ultimately is even if something agrees with my thinking, I assume it's wrong unless I can find a very, very long tail. If I can find a heritage of a trend that dates back not just dozens of years, but thousands of years, then I think we're on to something.
Yeah, it's hard to argue with the old ways if they have, many, many chapters of existence.
I'll give you an example of that. So I was in New York a while back, and a buddy of mine who lives there said, "Hey, man, you want to go to one of the steam baths, in Lower East Side? There's the old Russian baths on the Lower East Side." I'm like, "Yeah, I'll check it out." And you get down to these places, and they've been around. These things have been around since the 1800s. A lot of them are like the same buildings, and the experience was fantastic because you have all these different rooms, steam rooms, some with like sprues, and some with like a hot steam, some with like a dry heat. and the cold plunge pool. But what really got me was after you've been going in and out of the pool, you've been steaming and jumping into the cold baths, you can go to a refreshment bar and buy a beverage and then go up on the roof and sit in the sun and drink your beverage. And he's like, hey, try this. And it was salt water. You buy a bottle of salt water. I'm like, dude, I want something refreshing. He's like, try this. When you're depleted, you drink the salt water and it tastes sweet. And then as your salt levels stabilize again, it starts to taste salty and sour. And he's like,
Yep.
your body is telling you what it needs. And the fact that we're doing these cold plunges, so now like Wim Hof and Laird Hamilton, everyone else is so into cold plunges, which is cool. But there's such a heritage of this dating back thousands of years,
Yeah.
Caesar was doing cold plunges.
Yeah. Yeah. The salt thing is interesting. I just did a 24-hour event this past weekend, and all of my sodium intake I do based on taste. So I know immediately if like I use Element, which is a salt brand, but if it tastes good, I know I'm really depleted. And then the minute it tastes bad, I know that I don't need it anymore. And it works just as simply as that.
I was crewing for Louis Escobar at Badwater one year, almost 20 years ago now. And he had this really cool nutritionist with him, Sonny Blendy. And I think I mentioned like in the acknowledgments or something of Born to Run. And, Sonny had this phrase that an ultra marathon is basically just an eating and drinking contest with some scenery and exercise thrown in. And I watched her during the course of this 135 miles basically just try different foods on Lewis. So it was not based on a plan. Like, okay, you got to have this goo and you got to have this supplement, you got to have this thing. It was like, hey, how's the melon taste? Oh, you spit it out? How about a piece of fried chicken? That tastes good? Okay, grease it is. So I think it tunes into that your animal metabolism is going to seek out what it wants.
Yeah, I've heard my friends call it like a 50-mile buffet.
Yeah,
You
right.
just bounce from spot to spot, stuffing your face with as much food as possible.
Yeah, yeah. Did you hear Lucio Bartholomew talk about her first ultra marathon? She gets into this thing where because she'd been a competitive runner, and then as a teenager, she's like, "What? You can go slow and talk to people and eat whatever you want in a race? Like, sign me up."
I'm in.
Yeah.
So, so your story kind of progresses into learning about these folks in the Copper Canyons, and I was very into, still am very into primitive skills and the natural way of running and spending a lot of time in nature. And I had done some research on them and had learned about this guy who ends up being kind of the anti-hero of Born to Run. So I'm curious what uh, your interaction with him, if any, was like. Because I feel like typically with Born to Run, you talk about all the cool heroes, right? You talk about Caballo Blanco, you talk about, um, the crazy stories of Barefoot Ted, but rarely do you hear about the sort of villain of the story.
Oh, you talking about the guy who originally brought them up to Leadville?
That's right.
Boy, it's been a while, and I don't even remember his name off the top of my head.
Fisher, right?
Rick Fisher, that was it. Yeah. You know, here's the deal. So here's where Born to Run came from. I had, let's see, heard about the tribe, went down to the Copper Canyon, spent a little time, met Caballo, knew this race was going to come in 9 months, but there really wasn't a story there for me because, well, I didn't really learn much from Caballo. I didn't really learn much from the Tarahumara. And this race that was going to take place wasn't going to happen for another 9 months or more. And so I didn't really have a reportable story for Runner's World. But I did have a friend who was an editor for 5280 magazine in Denver, Max Potter. So I called Max up and said, hey, man, do you know about this tribe and like these races that they were in Colorado in the 90s? He's like, yeah, I know a little bit about them. Like, you want to do a story? And to me, the story was about like xenophobia and racism in Colorado. Like,
Mm.
my thinking was, hey man, if the Lakers win the title, then the Lakers are the defending champion, and everybody wants to see the defending champion return next year. So here you have a group that kicked the living crap out of everybody 2 years in a row, and then they never come back again. So to
Wow.
me, my assumption was, well, this must be these race guys, the race directors in Leadville, Colorado, must not have invited them back, must have not wanted them back because they were embarrassing the American runners. That was my assumption. So
Mm.
the story I pitched at 5280 is we should do a big, like, blow the lid off of this kind of prejudice that is excluding the most talented runners in favor of the homegrown runners. So I'm going to go to Leadville and go after the race directors and see what they have to say, which I did. So I call up and I make contact with Merrill Lee and Ken Klober and go down to Leadville. And within about 90 seconds, I realized I am so far off the mark. Like, my assumption was so effing wrong because I sit down and talk to Ken, and he's like, I'd love to have him back. I don't care. We'll give him free room. It's like, anytime. I'll have him over to my house for dinner. They were great. Those guys were fantastic. The guy that brought him, on the other hand, I'm ready to ride that guy out of town on a rail. And what convinced me was everybody attached to the race were so casual and off the cuff about this. And then when you go to Leadville, again, I'm coming from a big urban marathon perspective. Like, if you want to talk to somebody from the Boston Marathon, New York City Marathon, good effing luck. You're going to work your way through PR people and all kinds of like different layers. Leadville, you just walk into the office and see who's around. Oh, hey, there's Ken. Let's grab a coffee and talk. So it's such a mom and pop feel to the Leadville Trail 100. At least it was back then. So I talked to Ken and said, hey, why is it, hard-hitting reporter, why is it that this group has not been invited back? He's like, they're invited back anytime they want to come. Love to have them. They're fantastic. Mark Timano, guy's fucking hilarious, But yeah, he goes, but the guy who brought them, we weren't a fan of. And then I spent time in Leadville and realized, okay, the story I'm going to write is the opposite story. It's not why the race excluded them. It's why it was not a good match. Why people were taking this group out of their comfort zone and then bringing them to the U.S. to essentially be exhibition items. It was kind of the thing that was happening back in the colonial era, where, English explorers would come to America and take indigenous people back to Britain, saying, look at the noble savage. So that's what my original article, actually, I think the first article I ever wrote about any of this was for 5280. And so, with Rick, I sort of don't recall even now, looking back on the reporting. I remember talking to him, his ex-wife, saw a ton of video, talked to a lot of people involved. And, ultimately, I don't know, it's hard to see what's in someone's soul, what they're doing. I'm sure Rick can make a case for why he thought he was doing the best. I remember his ex-wife was a very compassionate person, and it's hard to imagine that she would do things that she thought were harmful. But, also when you get into high pressure situations, all kinds of stuff comes out, of your behavior. So I'm not sure if I'm giving you a good answer here, Ryan, but that's kind of where I'm at with it. But I think ultimately what it was another guy who was on the scene at the time. You had Ken Klober, you had Rick Fisher, but you also had the guy in the shadows. You had old Mike True, who was there and was pacing the Tarahumara and was seeing what was going on as a fly on the wall. And it stuck in his mind, hey man, if I ever do a race, I'm not doing it this way.
Yeah. Yeah, and so for anybody listening that isn't familiar, Micah True, aka Caballo Blanco, those are the same person, so it might be a little bit confusing, but ultimately he's kind of the figurehead that seems to unite the two worlds, right? You have this reclusive tribe of super athletes that can run hundreds of miles. You have kind of the gringos, and then you have Micah True, who is a once gringo and became more reclusive ultra runner as his life went on. So just a little bit of background there on the story itself. Did I do a good job of summing that up, or?
You did, you did. Although I was just actually kind of smiling to myself, like you were able to summarize it a lot faster than it took me to figure it out. Because this guy was one, this guy was one cagey pain in the ass, man. It took me 2 years to find out his actual name. His actual name isn't even Micah True. It's Michael Randall Hickman.
Yeah,
And
I heard that actually. Like at the recent, someone was giving a keynote at that Micah True or Caballo Blanco Ultra, and they said a different name. I'm like, oh, he's got three names.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And I only found that out because he had mentioned he was a character, dude. A character with a capital C. Not many of them, roll across your horizon in your lifetime. And usually when they do, you're so busy dealing with them that you don't take the step back to realize, oh, like relish this moment because you are in the presence of a true one-off. But you know who got it? Lewis got it. Jen Shelton got it. Billy Barnett got it. Like they really enjoyed Barefoot Ted, and they enjoyed Micah a lot. I was aggravated by both of them, and it's a life lesson. So the person who gave that talk was Lewis, and not only did he appreciate Caballo, but he would have Caballo stay at his house. The number of people who have rocked up, I don't know if you know Kat Bradley, Western States champion, like 2017. She like dropped out of college to go live at Lewis's house. Caballo would live at Lewis's house. Barefoot Ted stays at Lewis's house. I've stayed at Lewis's house. Lewis and his wife Beverly are running this kind of like youth hostel for wandering ultra running ding dongs. But I'm leading you straight. When I met Caballo, he went by Caballo, and then he went by Micah, and then he mentioned he had been a fighter, a professional fighter in the Colorado area back in the 80s. And so I went to Denver Public Library and started like digging through newspapers, started doing a clip search, an old school clip search. And I came across a picture of a guy, but the guy went by the Gypsy Cowboy. They're like, well, who's the Gypsy Cowboy? Oh, well, the Gypsy Cowboy is Michael Randall Hickman. But I'm looking at the picture like, that's the dude. But he's going by Michael Randall Hickman. And so I sent him the picture. I said, hey, man, is this you? And he's like, oh, what the fuck are you doing? It's private. What are you doing? And like, is it you or is it not you? Yeah, man, that's me, but it was a different time. So his real name was Michael Randall Hickman, a.k.a. Gypsy Cowboy, a.k.a. Micah True, a.k.a. Caballo Blanco.
That's incredible. And so you get wind of him, and you have the opportunity to go down there. I don't think many people necessarily understand the vastness of the Copper Canyons. What was going through your mind, kind of like you're just a normal guy trying to investigate this story? You're kind of in uncharted territory at that point. What was going through your head in terms of traveling down there?
Yeah, I think denial is probably the most important virtue. Ignorance and denial are the best two things you can have going into life. Because if I had known, or I'd actually come to terms with reality, I wouldn't have done a lot of this stuff. But I had started my writing career as a foreign correspondent, which meant basically always showing up in places where you don't know what's going on. You plunge into a story, you got to figure it out on the fly. It's jump off the roof and learn to flap your wings on the way down. And so I was kind of used to that. Like, rush off, figure it out, get the article, run back and write it. And then you get into magazine freelancing, which is that on steroids, because you're competing with a lot of other freelancers. And so you got to call an editor up and say, hey man, I heard about this tribe in Mexico. And they're like, are they legit? Oh yeah, they're legit. Are you going to have access? Oh yeah, I've got access. You lie, you say, oh yeah, you promise all this shit, because an editor doesn't want to contract the story if they don't think you can actually get the story. So you got to pretend you know all this stuff, right, when you don't. And you figure, oh, I'll figure it out when I get there. And that was basically my mentality. As I was in Mexico already on another assignment. I mean, I'll just rip off, do this one real quick, get double pay, for the same amount of time. And I hadn't researched anything. I had no clue how incredibly gargantuan that. It's like going into the Copper Canyon is like being lost at sea in a life raft. Man, you're in the middle of nowhere. And the only guy I could find that would take me really didn't know what the hell he was doing. And nobody ever mentioned the obvious fact that a place that's hard to reach would be a great place for drug cartels to operate. So I didn't know any of that stuff. If I had, might I've made other choices? Probably, yeah. I probably wouldn't have bothered, I would have assumed the odds of me finding anything were too slim. So I probably would have just bailed and moved on to a different story.
Yeah, that's a good point though. I think there's something to that. Having ignorance about a situation or not knowing exactly what's going to go down. Do you think, I mean, nobody would ever run their first 100-mile race if they knew exactly how bad it was going to hurt? Like, there's no way you could put yourself through that.
It's a weird trick of the mind because going into it, you're like, well, it can't be that bad. And then at mile 80, like, oh my God, it's so much worse. And then you finish and you go, never again. And then 2 hours later, you're
Right.
making plans for the next one. It's insane how your
Exactly.
mind
It's a roller
refuses.
coaster ride.
Yeah, your mind refuses to see what's really happening. Only for one brief moment, like at mile 75, do you realize, oh, this is what it really is. And then as soon as you're done, it just fades and you're good to go again.
You get down there and you start to make these connections. One thing that I'm really curious about um, is how the whole group from Born to Run came together. For people that have read it, people that haven't read it, it just becomes this very unique group of athletes all pursuing kind of this really unique and remote ultra marathon. But there's no clear reason that that group was aligned. There's nothing that ties you all together. You're not from the same place. You're not the same age. You're not all the same nationality. There is not really any one thing you can point to. So I'm curious kind of what it was that tied that group together.
Yeah, it's funny. I think the glue is invisible, but there's a glue. But from the outside, you got these two ding dong hard partying surfers from Virginia Beach. You got the god of ultramarathoning, Scott Jurek, who's like the LeBron of the sport at that time. You
His
got
book is right on the book stand in front of me.
Yeah, you got Barefoot Ted, who's just this wandering yapping dude who likes to go barefoot. You got Luis Escobar, who's really a family portrait photographer. This is early in his career before he became a really well-known adventure sports photographer. Back then, he was just doing prom pictures. You got a journalist who's can't run his in over his head. You got a coach who is basically down here to watch. So it's all, as you said, completely different elements, different parts of the country, different experiences and motivations. But I think the glue revealed itself to me recently when we were working on the sequel, actually, Born to Run 2, because after Born to Run, I always thought, boy, isn't it remarkable that not only do we have this adventure together, but we stayed together. Like we've become important parts of each other's lives ever since. And so, I was kind of curious about that. Like, was it just a weird trick of fate that these 7 people happen to rock up on Gilligan's Island and seem to get along? Or is there something self-selective that put us there in the first place? And I got the answer when we worked on Born to Run 2, because one of my goals for Born to Run 2 was I wanted this book to be really visual. I did not want to try to make the argument in words that running should be communal and joyful and diverse. I wanted to smack people right in the face with it. I wanted them to open the book and on every single page see pictures of people of color, people of different genders, of people who are gender non-binary, people running with dogs, people running with kids, people running with prosthetics. Every single page, I wanted to hit this message. Yes, everybody is born to run. Everybody. And so we got together, this hodgepodge of people, just this kind of Hail Mary thing of like, hey, anybody know somebody, who runs with a prosthetic? Hey, anybody know somebody who's a trans runner, who's gay, who's older, who's younger, who's big, who's small. Let's get these people together. And none of us had ever met more than one or the other before. So it was like 10 people together. And at most, each person maybe knew one other person or knew nobody. And we had such a ball that weekend getting together for this photo shoot. 10 strangers. And if you see the cover photo of Born to Run 2, to me, there was no question that that was a cover photo because everybody looked so happy together. And also, ironically, that I was not in the picture because I ran down as usual to like tell Lewis what to do. And I forgot to run back up in time. So I think the thing about it is that the glue is that sense of pleasure for pleasure's sake.
Yeah.
Why was Scott Jurek in the bottom of this canyon for this wacky ass backyard race run by this weird hermit? Because Scott is all about the run, That's why he's all over the goddamn place too. He Badwater, Western States, Hard Rock, wherever that one is it Spartathlon? Not Spartathlon. Is it Spartathlon? Wherever the one is in Greece. Scott's all over the place,
Yeah.
And so Barefoot Ted, all over the place. Jen and Billy, all over the place. I think the thing about it is they love the joy, the adventure, the other people. And that's what got us there in the first place.
I think it's a really interesting thing because there is kind of two frames of mind, and maybe these exist in everyone, which is the grind it out, stay hard, kind of self-punishment attitude of running or fitness. And then there's like the happy-go-lucky enjoyment out for the experience, looking at the birds, school of thought. And it seems like the Born to Run group really kind of falls into that latter group.
Yeah, but that Born to Run group wins races too. And they stay around for a long time.
Yeah, it's interesting because you would think that that happy-go-lucky thing corresponds with like lower performance, but your point is that you can have just as high performance with also enjoying it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm so against that whole, stay hard mentality. I think it's actually the root of everything that's wrong in America today. Be tough, win, beat the other guy, be as hard as you can. Don't care about anything except the win. And if you want to really look at everything in the, I don't want to make this like too global a response to your question, but to me, if you look at everything that is the problematic in the United States today, it's about shitting on the other guy to get what's yours. About being hard. What does being hard mean? It means about caring about nothing except yourself and your win. Even if it means putting yourself in the emergency room. Because you put yourself in the emergency room, that puts a lot of other people at risk. If you run hard until you collapse on the trail, well, that means someone's got to find your ass on the trail, get you off the trail, get you to the hospital. People who care about you are worried. Other people are putting themselves at risk. Why? Because of your ego. Because you have to be hard. And when you look at all the things that are problematic in the United States today, I'm not taking a vaccine, not me. I got my freedoms. You can't take my guns away. I got my freedom. I'm going to stay hard, all that kind of shit about lying and cheating and stealing in order to get an advantage, but you're cool because you got the win. You're touching a nerve right now because someone who lives very close to me, one of my neighbors, is a major Fox television talking head, and she comes out against trans people, against people who want to control guns. And every time I see her, I just saw her this morning, and it drives me crazy because this attitude of like, we're going to do what we want and you can't stop us attitude drives me insane. And so that might not seem like a direct response to your question about the two schools, the Be Hard versus the Born to Runs. But let's look at it this way, Ryan. Anything that you don't want to do, at some point you will stop. And this has been proven with every kind of discipline. This whole idea of like people putting themselves on forced diets. I'm just going to only eat 1,000 calories a day, and I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to. At some point, you're just going to quit. And it's the same with running programs. I think the biggest reason why people look at running as something unpleasant is because it is unpleasant. They do a negative downward spiral. Like, oh, you know what? I ate ice cream last night. I'm going to have to run today. And then you're going to run to the point where you're uncomfortable, because if I'm uncomfortable, I must be doing something good. I must be burning off those calories. And then you're going to be sore, and you're going to be on the verge of injury. And at some point, you're going to quit the activity. Now look at the other way. What if you're on an upward cycle? Like, you know what? I'm going to go out with my brother, go for a run. And we're going to talk about my mom and complain about my mom for 2 miles. But we're going to run so slowly that we can keep the conversation going. And we're only going to run until we don't feel like it anymore. Then we're going to stop. And then we're going to have a coffee and walk back. So the Stay Hard school is like, well, you just didn't do anything, But the Born to Run school is like, you know what? I can't wait to do that tomorrow. That was fun. And your buddy wants to come back. He had a good time too. It becomes a reinforcing upward cycle as opposed to a negative downward cycle of, pain and dissatisfaction.
Yeah, I think there's something to that. I would push back a little bit and say that some of my times where I have the most fun with a run are after a really hard run. I get this amazing burst of catecholamines. My dopamine shoots way up. I'm excited. I'm calling people from high school that I haven't talked to in a long time because I feel like talking to people. I'm so excited. But really, I just did an 8x1000 workout where I was running much faster than I normally would. And now I've like spiked up so high. And even though it sucked in the moment, I'm having a lot of fun after that.
For sure. And listen, man, I'm all about that. Like I said, Born to Run runners win races. Scott Jurek will never tell you that, hey, man, my 7th Western States was a walk in the park. No, I'm sure it's hard as shit. Bad water. Just that course is hard as hell. There's an extreme amount of discomfort that comes with it. But, I think the dividing line is what you got out of it was the pleasure. You were uncomfortable in the moment. You were pushing yourself into distressed states. But your motivation was, I'm here to enjoy it. I'm not here to go to the hospital, You're not here to collapse. You were here for those breakthroughs, Sure. And the breakthrough is not breakdowns.
Yeah, that's a good point. We just did this just makes me think of this past weekend. We did a 24-hour bike assault bike. Have you ever seen an assault bike? You kind of use the hands and the legs. It's a fan bike.
No.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I don't, but it sounds horrible.
Yeah, it was rough. I did it for 24 hours, and
good gravy, dude.
It definitely sucked, but during it, I had a bunch of people next to me, pacing me, and a lot of them biked the furthest they had ever biked in their life, and it turned out to be like there was a lot of fun times. In the middle of the night, there was no one there at 4 a.m., so the police, like the local police department, sent people there, and there was policemen on the bike next to me, and we were all partying even though it was kind of miserable.
Yeah, I did an event a couple years back. It was a 24-hour stair climb in Philadelphia.
Ooh.
You know what, dude? It was so fun. I
Really?
loved it. I loved it. Yeah, and I think it was probably very similar in some ways to your assault bike 24-hour. It was on the Art Museum steps in Philadelphia, the Rocky Steps. And, it starts off at like 5 a.m. And you go through all those, phases of the sun and the moon. Sun's up hot as hell, but someone bought a bunch of water ice, and you had the best water ice you ever had in your life is at like noon on an August day. And then when it gets dark out, suddenly it's cool and the city lights are coming up. And yes, physical exhaustion, but you're having these moments. Well, I had this experience recently when I went out for a run and I was high up on a trail and it was totally exposed, it was above tree line, and all of a sudden this ripping storm comes through. And I'm like, oh well, this is just your life for the next hour because there's nothing you can do. There's no shelter and you're on the trail. So you gotta just keep going. And my first thought was like, God, you're so stupid, you know. And then my second thought was like, wait a minute, you're the only one in the world having this experience right now. There's nobody else
Yeah.
up here, and you're in it, and you are unique in the world. So like the rain's coming down, the wind, but I'm looking around thinking, okay, it's kind of cool. Like this is like being the first dude on planet Mars. Like you're the only one having this experience, and like enjoy the suckiness of it.
Yeah, I actually that's a good point. I wanted to ask you, how has your running slash fitness slash health journey changed since becoming the author of, like, I don't know, maybe the biggest running book ever? Has it turned you more into an athlete? Have you done a lot of races since then? Have you kind of gotten burnt out on it? What are your feelings towards running and fitness in general?
Well, you know, it's funny. Eric Orton, the guy who coached me for Born to Run and has kind of intermittently coached me ever since, reminded me of something. So this whole idea for Born to Run 2 came out of the fact that I get a lot of messages from people asking me for advice, and I
Mm.
would just never answer because I'm not a coach. You know, I write about coaches, but I'm not the guy with the knowledge. And then I was relating this to Eric one time. We're talking on the phone, and like, yeah, somebody was asking me again, like, you know, what shoes, and I'm not going to answer. And he's like, why not? You've been a 15-year experiment, man. It's coming on 20 years. And now
Yeah.
you're in a position where you can actually tell people what works for you. And I didn't really have that perspective. Like I wasn't aware of how much time had gone by. And he said, do you remember the first conversation we had? I said to you, if I could give you a magic wand and turn you into any kind of runner you want to be, what is it? What kind of runner do you want to be? And you know, the magic wand question is a perplexing one because at first you're like, oh yeah, I want to win the Olympics. You know, I want to qualify for Boston. But when you actually ask yourself the question, like, I don't really give a shit about qualifying for Boston. Olympic medal. I don't even watch the Olympics. Like, what do I really want as a runner? And it's a great question. And my answer to him then was, you know, dude, I just want to be able to walk out the door and run as far as I want in any direction I want, whenever I want. Like that's all I want. I want the ability to say, hey man, you know what? It's a sunny day. Oh, that mountain looks cool. I'm heading that way. Or you know what? Hey, it's kind of a cloudy day. I think I'm just going to go short. Whatever I want to do in the moment. And he said, okay, man, it's been 20 years and mission accomplished. Like that's what I do. And so what I got today is exactly what I wanted back then was that
Yeah.
ability. Because, you know, I got my run plan out today. So early this morning, I went down to this beach. I was trying to body surf. The waves were garbage. And the only reason I rushed back, so dude, I would have missed this conversation by a lot longer because if the waves had been good, my thought was I didn't need to be back here until noon my time. But the
Yeah.
waves are mush. So I said, you know, screw that. I'm going to rush back, eat a quick peanut butter and jelly, and then I have this real cool trail that I want to run today. I'm going to run that 2 hour trail and be back just in time for Ryan. And then I found out, no, actually, I had the time wrong. But um, so my goal for today is all right. The waves are garbage, so I'm going to pivot. And there's this trail that I really like. I'm going to go run that as soon as I'm free.
Hell yeah. How far is it?
It's not far. I mean, I go right out my door. It's probably a 10-mile loop, you know. But
Okay. So you're
it's
putting
got a
in
lot.
some serious miles still.
You know what? That word right there, serious, doesn't feel serious at all. Because I know the route. I'm going to meander it, and there's a guy that sells fresh tuna out of his front yard on the way back. So I'm going to bring my wallet and buy some fish. You know, it's like in my mind, this is a fun run.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess substantial mileage is a better word than serious. Like, you're making it sound super effortless, but for 99% of people in this country, they hear 10 miles, and that is an unconquerable feat.
Yeah, I look at that and think, maybe not so much. Maybe the 10 miles is unconquerable because of the expectations we put on ourselves. So
Yeah.
I don't want to minimize it, but I bet you a lot more people could do 10 miles if they told themselves, okay, you know what, I'm going to walk a mile and I'm going to jog a couple miles and then I'm going to climb a trail and then I'm going to get some ice cream on the way back. Like if it just
Yeah.
became just by any means necessary.
Hmm.
There's a crew, Run for Chinatown, that is pushing hard in New York to get more Asian Americans involved in running. And every time I say they're the most fun running club, I then remember like five other clubs that are also fun. But Run for Chinatown is among the most fun running clubs around because they run over the Manhattan Bridge. The sun's going down. Everyone's talking. They're watching the lights come up over New York. People are laughing. And then they always pick a Chinese restaurant, and the whole crew just crowds in and they order their faces off. And a lot of people are running a lot farther than they ever expected really quick
Mm.
because of the joy this group brings to it.
Yeah, that's a big thing is explaining to people, especially new runners, that it isn't about running fast. It's just about going out and enjoying the day and finding out what your style is. We're all built different. You're a bigger guy, I'm a bigger guy. Neither of us are gonna be running sub 3 marathons this year at Boston. We're just not gonna do that. But I think my style is probably pretty similar to yours, which is kind of more adventure running, freedom running, if you will. I really like to go out and go far and just see what's out there.
Yeah. And people mistake that for, like laziness or not trying hard. But like you said, I don't think I've ever finished a workout that didn't feel like it was at least 30 minutes longer than I wanted. Like every time I go out, like, how come I'm not done already? Like since we moved to Hawaii, I got into outrigger canoe paddling. And I feel like I've never come in with my canoe where I didn't feel like, God damn it, why didn't I come in half an hour earlier? Why am I still out here? But that's kind of cool. You're always pushing your limits, but it's the freedom that gets you into those predicaments where you're exploring your boundaries. Because I go
Yeah.
out for a paddle, I'm like, oh, hey, look at that island over there. I wonder if I can get there. We'll see how long it takes. Like I'm not trying to do it for time. I'm not trying to set any records. I'm just curious. And that curiosity always gets you into a predicament. You're like, oh shit, looks like I'll be working harder than I wanted to.
Yeah, that's kind of the beauty and the curse of the adventure running is sometimes you get in over your head a little bit, which is probably good for us.
Yeah. I think it's why you sign up for a 24-hour assault bike. Have you done anything like that, either that length or on that kind of a bike before?
No, I'm not a biker at all. I actually hurt my feet snowshoeing, and all I could do was the stationary bike. So I pretty much just said, "Huh, I wonder how far I can go in 24 hours." And it turns out the answer is 426 miles. So that's the answer. Now we know. Now I don't have to do it
It's
again.
yeah, but I guarantee you will. Guaranteed. Yeah, because you're like, you know what? If I only had done this, I could have gone 500. Like in your mind, like, oh yeah, I learned a lot. Why not try it again?
Yeah, maybe. We'll see. I don't know. That one I feel like maybe I'll never do again. Like I love 24-hour runs or I would even like boat maybe for 24 hours, but stationary bike is miserable because you're inside the whole time. I don't think I've been inside for 24 hours in years. Like I don't remember the last time I'd ever been inside for 24 hours.
Isn't that cool to think about? Yeah, I'm kind of the same way, man. The sun's up, I'm out the door.
Yeah, I don't want to be inside anymore than I have to be. So that was yeah, maybe one and done on that one. Christopher, one question I have, you know, or I think, a lot of people have is what led you to shift gears going from Born to Run 1, which is very much an epic and a novel and a story, like a hero's tale, to something that's much more practical guide and practicing certain methods in Born to Run 2. What was the thought process there?
There are two things. One is that I thought that, well, when Born to Run first came out, it didn't initially make much of an impact. It wasn't reviewed in any newspapers. Runner's World wasn't going to touch it. And I wasn't getting on like, Fresh Air with Terry Gross or CBS Sunday Morning. I really got no attention whatsoever. But it started to pick up a word of mouth kind of a thing. And it started to spread, hand to hand. And that's what actually started to drive sales was runners were telling other runners, people were telling, hey, man, you don't have to be a runner. Check this book out. So it was purely a word of mouth phenomenon. And so, but I assumed, okay, man, you know what? It's going to have the shelf life of like ice cream. It's going to melt and vanish before you know it. But when things started to gain traction and the message came across, run for joy, learn about your body, don't fall for the marketing, don't fall for the fancy shoes and the pronation, the orthotics, the rest of that crap. Like let your body express itself. Let the animal inside reveal itself. I thought that message would take over. And then what I saw over time was, oh man, we just reverted right back to where we were before. Cushion shoes, compression this, supplement that, all this junk you buy and buy and buy. And as you mentioned, like the whole, stay hard message. And I just felt it was time to course correct and go back. And in Born to Run, I suggested ways to approach running. And in Born to Run 2, I was actually going to spell it out. Like, here's what you can do. Because like in Born to Run, I was not advocating for minimal shoes. I wasn't even wearing them myself. Like, hey, there's this one guy that wears them. Here's what I know. Figure it out for yourselves. I'm not a coach. Here's what this guy told me to do. We'll see whether it works. So Born to Run is told from the perspective of like, hey, I'm a newcomer in this field. I have no clue if I'm going to finish this race or not. Born to Run 2 is told from the perspective of like, hey, I've been in this now for 20 years, and I'm convinced that these things work. So if you want to ask me what shoe to wear, I'll tell you. If you want to ask me how to train for a race, I'll tell you. Because I feel that now I both personally experience and witness a lot of people who benefited from this approach.
Yeah, I think you definitely sell yourself short in terms of being somebody with enough credentials to speak on the matter. I think maybe that's just because you're humble, but I mean, I think you definitely hold a position where folks want to know your opinion. They wouldn't ask you if they didn't, they wouldn't be asking.
Let me think about that for a second because I think there are a lot of people who know a lot more than I do, but we're not hearing their voices. And so that's why I felt like, okay, I just assumed, I mean, it's true. There are people who know a lot more about running, training, coaching than I do, for sure. I just assumed that those people would rise to prominence over the past 10 years. And so, but they sort of haven't. So their voices haven't been amplified. So what Born to Run 2 really is me listening to Eric and then saying it louder. Like he's the voice in my ear and then me shouting it. That's what it really is.
But here's the thing. Yes, there's plenty of people who know black and white running more than you do. They know where to put the tally mark for the long run and the speed work and all that. But that's not why someone like me would come to you. I think the reason I look up to someone like you is because this combination of, yes, running experience, but also the ability to honor the old ways. You have this ability to bring both of those two things together where you're recognizing that there is sports performance and modernity has improved on some of those aspects, but there's also a reason to relish in the past and what we've been doing for thousands of years. And I remember seeing specifically your TED Talk talking about the persistence hunters and why it is that pregnant women are able to run so far, and why it is that old folks and 16-year-olds run roughly the same distance. And then, there's the elite runners that kind of are centralized in age. And, that entire message, and really thinking about, oh, he really has studied like the anthropology behind running, not just the X's and O's of a training schedule.
Hey, Ryan, you know what's funny? I just got my alert, my calendar alert, alerting me that our podcast interview is 1 hour from now.
Sweet.
Just to verify how badly I messed up on our timing. Thank you.
No,
So
that's
yeah,
okay.
maybe there is a benefit to that. It's an outsider's perspective. It's the Moneyball syndrome. It's not the same old coaches looking at players and deciding who should be the best baseball players. It's outsiders who are actually looking at hard facts and numbers and making a decision that way. And for me, Outside Magazine just had yet another article about Iten in Kenya and the birthplace of the greatest runners in the world. I'm like, oh, dude, like how many times do we hear the same thing over and over? Yes, a high altitude subsistence environment will prepare people for marathon, but also it's because it is the basis of Kenya's economy is producing marathon runners who last 2 or 3 years and they burn out and vanish. And so, but they keep hitting the same point over again. It's faster, faster, faster. It got to be fast. The marathon fast. And maybe to take an outsider to look at the perspective, humans are not fast. Speed is not our great natural ability. It is our adaptability and our endurance and our collaboration. That's what makes us good. And so maybe that was it. Maybe I was bringing a perspective that was getting lost in this constant harping. So a couple of years ago, back when Nike was doing its 2-hour marathon project, a reporter called me up and wanted to interview me about the 2-hour marathon. Like, can we break that? I said, who gives a shit? Who cares? I don't care whether somebody does something a second faster than somebody else did something. We're always talking about speed. I don't care because that number means nothing. But you show me where 1 million new runners have begun going out every day. Now I'm interested,
Yeah.
If Nike, instead of like, let's break the 159.59, who gives a shit? But if you tell me Nike threw all of its weight around a running program that would teach proper running form and made a goal of getting 1 million new runners in the streets, like now I'm excited.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think really that's what your book did for a lot of people, though. I'm sure, I don't know what the actual numbers are, but I'm sure there's a massive, incalculable, impression that book made on new runners. And I'm sure at this point it has surpassed anything that you could have expected.
Yeah, for sure. Well, it's funny because you always have two things in your mind as a writer. It's probably the same thing that we experience in any kind of endurance event, which is like, yeah, I can do that. And part of your mind's like, no, you can't. And it's that seesaw. So when I was working on Born to Run, I was thinking to myself, dude, if this book sucks, we know exactly who to blame. It's you, because the material is fantastic. This is a great story. So if people don't like it, it's because you did a shitty job. And so part of my mind is like, this book should be really popular because it's a great story. But the other part of my mind is like, but who reads these days anyway? Books just don't last. So in some ways, it exceeded my practical, pragmatic analysis of the book market. But as far as my own appreciation of what was there, it felt like, yeah, this is, because here's the thing about it was, back then there was only one book that was really kind of fun, and that was Ultra Marathon Man, Dean Karnazes' book. That was the only book that was out there. Like, oh, this is kind of cool. Like, Dean wrote a real rip snorting tale. And to me, the only thing Dean's story was missing was other people besides Dean. Like if there had been more people in that book, it would have been a little bit more universal. And I think the one thing that was missing from Dean's tale was it wasn't accessible to the average person. Because you look at Dean, like, well, shoot, dude, I'm not gonna roll up a pizza in a tube and eat it while I'm running 200 miles. You know, it's too much. And so there wasn't a universal access point where people could really identify with an otherwise really, really great book.
Yeah. How scary is that moment, when you hit publish or when you hit send on a book like Born to Run that you put so much time and energy into? Was there like a lot of anxiety associated with, holy shit, I hope this turns out well?
You know what the anxiety is? That you got it right. That's what the real anxiety is.
Mm,
I think I had enough publishing experience as a magazine freelancer and a news reporter where you realize, oh, nobody's really paying attention. Like I was covering the genocide in Rwanda, and I was pretty much off grid for about 3 months, where all my message traffic was one way. I had a satellite telex where I could send print copy back to HQ in New York, but it didn't receive messages. And so I would only get messages every couple of days when I could get on a sat phone and call the control bureau in Nairobi and talk to the bureau chief. So I was really kind of cut off. Like I didn't really know what the news coverage was. And so I assumed after a couple of weeks that no one's paying any attention anymore. And I was actually shocked when I came out and go, oh, this is still front page news. Like I had no idea because I was just so used to, you do a story and people just don't pay attention. And same with magazine articles. You spend 3 months working on a story. To you, it's the best thing you ever did. And, it goes out there in a couple of days, people forget about it. And so with a book, you're thinking the same thing. Like, okay,
mm,
I hope people read it. They probably won't. I'm already thinking about the next project before, because you finish the manuscript and it's 9 months before the book is on the newsstand. Well, for me, I'm already on the next project. I'm already working on Natural Born Heroes by that point. But the big abiding concern you have is like, did I get this right? And like for instance, with Barefoot Ted, he bugged me so much down the Copper Canyons that I went to his house and hung out with him for a couple of weeks just to get to know him better. Because I thought, am I missing something here with this guy? Because everybody else seems to like him, but he's like driving me bananas. And so I saw a side of him that I didn't appreciate down the Copper Canyons. And so, but when I write this portrayal of him, it's kind of, in some ways it's kind of mean. I'm kind of making fun of Ted. But I also feel like it's accurate. So that's the anxiety. The anxiety is, am I doing right by the people? Am I going hard when you got to go hard, and kind when it's time to go kind?
yeah, there's a lot of weight behind that because you want it to have honesty, you want it to have emotion, but you also want to appease people. You don't want to just shit all over the people that are being so nice and being characters in your book.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I know
It's
that Anne
it's a
Trayson,
tough
for
thing.
instance, um, is unhappy with her depiction in Born to Run. Um, I feel like
Really?
it's yeah, yeah. Well, it's funny because she's a very private person, and I reached out to her a bunch of times and had no luck getting in contact with her. But I had a ton of video footage of the Leadville race and other interviews. So I based a lot of what I wrote based on what was like in the public domain. Um, but yeah, she was unhappy with it. And again, it caught me by surprise. I thought that the depiction of her was kind of heroic. I thought she was an ass kicker and super, legendary. But she was unhappy with it. And then I realized, okay, that's just the way it goes. Not everyone's going to agree
Huh.
with the way you see things, but it also made me realize, writing books, it's not photography, it's painting. You're creating an impression of what you see. It's not a pixelated recreation of a moment. It
Mm-hmm.
is an impression that's been filtered
Mm-hmm.
through our brain and comes back out again.
Yeah, that's a good point. And for future reference, if you ever want to write about me and you describe me like you described Ann Trayson, I'll be pretty stoked. Like I thought she sounded pretty cool.
But you'd be surprised. You'd be surprised at people who get pissed and what they get pissed about. But then you just kind of roll with it too. But in the end, I'm okay with people being pissed. I just want to feel confident in my heart that I did my best to get it right.
Yeah. One thing you mentioned was that when you write something as a writer, you're kind of on to the next at the point of publish. So that kind of makes me think, what is Mr. McDougall working on now after Water
Oh,
Run 2?
yeah, it's kind of cool. I'm working on a book about body surfing, and one thing I've gotten used to two things. One is every book, someone will be pissed off, and number two, before you write every book, it's going to sound ridiculous. And so right now, like, oh, a book about body surfing, that's ridiculous. But it is cool, dude. Out here in Hawaii, it's a whole different game, man. Like what people are doing in the water, just their bodies and a pair of fins, it's wild. There's nothing you can do on a surfboard you can't do crazier without a surfboard.
Hmm. That's interesting. I mean, I guess I've surfed a lot, but I've never really thought about the complexities of body surfing. That's you definitely piqued my interest with that.
So where have you surfed?
Well, I started surfing at Ocean Beach in San Francisco, which is, for anybody that hasn't surfed, it is the worst place in America to learn to surf. There's no sectioning, really short wave period, pretty big waves year round. There's not really a small season. It's a little smaller in the summer, huge in the winter, and pretty sharky. Yeah, pretty much any danger that exists, Ocean Beach has it.
Yeah, it's funny because I was actually supposed to be in a body surfing contest up there at Steamer Lane, which is just outside in Santa
Oh, nice.
Cruz, and people were telling me, dude, you better
Yeah,
get
steamers.
a really thick wetsuit. Like a wetsuit, really? Like, oh my God, you have no idea. Like a 4-3 wetsuit, like 4-3. It's like what you wear to go to the moon, you know? And like, no, it's cold. Like, why would
Yep,
anybody do
it's
that? So
cold.
now I get. So have you ever surfed in Southern California, like around Newport Beach or anything like that?
Yeah, so I was living in a truck and made my way down there. I've done a couple surf trips in Southern California. I got to do Baja on a surf trip as well, and that was great. I also just did a jungle surfing trip down in southern Mexico, which was cool. Um, I love surfing. I just think uh, it was good for me to get baptism by fire because now surfing is everywhere I go, the conditions are great to what I started in. It's like if you if you started trail running and for the first 2 years you only ran in 6 inch deep mud. So then after that, everything is spectacular conditions. You don't know any
Right,
better. Everything's amazing.
right. That is good. So I recommend a film for you called
Okay.
Dirty Old Wedge. Dirty Old Wedge is about surfing the wedge in Newport Beach. It's a body
Okay, cool.
surfing only break. And I would say that, yeah. So when you were in Mexico, did you go to Puerto Escondido? Was that on your like southern Mexico leg?
No, but that's not far from where I was. I was in a place called Zapote, which is near Zihuatanejo.
Yeah, yeah. I
Yeah,
never body surfed in Mexico. I just the only place I know is Puerto Escondido because there's a contest there this summer I may go to. Uh, so what I
cool.
was saying to check out Dirty Old Wedge, but I would be very curious to see if we revisit this conversation in a year, whether you've come over to the body surfing side because now you probably didn't see a lot of it in San Francisco because it'd be friggin' miserable to body surf up there. And the Southern California breaks are so choked with surfers, it really isn't a gap for a body surfer to sneak in. But in Hawaii, there's a lot of body surfing. And there are certain places like Point Panic that's body surfing only. And you see some wizards out there.
Wow.
And probably your point about getting out of the mud, on a trail, and then suddenly like, oh my God, I got some hard pack, this is amazing. Same thing with body surfing. Like now that you've been surfing and someone tells you, hey dude, you don't need the board. You don't need the leash. You don't need the wetsuit. You just need some fins and a pair of, and a Speedo. When you try it, man, it is nuts. And then someone's going to tell you, dude, you can get a long ass left, on balancing on your hand. You can do spins, you can do somersaults on your hand. You're gonna want to check it out. So that was one recommendation. Check out the film Dirty Old Wedge. And the second one is a book called, do you know the book called Bone Games?
No, I don't.
Yeah, man. Check out Bone Games. It was written by a guy in Colorado. I forget his name, but he went in search of the flow state, the sense of that state you're in. And I think when we were discussing before, like the be hard versus the born to run mentality, I think Bone Games probably captured it better than I did, in the sense of like you can exceed your expectations for what you can accomplish, but by letting your body go as opposed to trying to force it. And this, be hard, run until your liver collapses versus breathe in, breathe out, let loose. You'll go faster, farther, and forever, as opposed to just grinding yourself into a fine powder. So yeah, Bone Games is a book, and Dirty Old Wedge is a film.
Do you remember the author of Bone Games?
Not off the top of my head, but yeah, if you Google it, it'll pop up in a heartbeat.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Sweet. I think you know, as we begin to wrap up here, if I was listening to this and I was a person who was particularly just now getting into running, what was or what is one piece of advice that I could apply to my life right now from Christopher Mcdougall about beginning a relationship with running in general?
This is the hardest advice for people to take. And as soon as I say it, I know most people are going to stop listening. But it's focus on fun. Focus on fun. Every run, you should finish it feeling like that was the best time I ever had. But people don't like to hear that. It comes from a mindset. It's the same conversation I have when people ask me about running shoes. And I start to tell them about minimalist shoes, and I get the, yeah, but my doctor says, yeah, but my feet are different. Yeah, but everybody likes to think that they are a special case and it has to be dangerous or painful. And I'm like, it doesn't. Focus on fun. So that focus on fun, when you break it down, go barefoot. Go barefoot. Barefoot's fun, dude. Nobody would rather wear shoes than go barefoot. The first thing you do when you get home, you take off your shoes, So you go to the beach, take off my shoes. Everybody would rather go barefoot. Yeah, but what about the syringes? What about the glass? What about the this? What about my arches, Try it. Focus on the fun. If you can only go 50 yards barefoot, that's going to be 50 fun yards, So that's my thing. If you want to develop a relationship with running, focus on fun. So my wife was getting into running. She's a dancer. And what she would do is she thought running was boring. So she would get a bunch of books and put them in a backpack and then just run around to there's those little free libraries in people's front, end of the driveway. And so she's like, oh yeah, there's like a couple of these around here. So she'd get books out of the house you want to get rid of, drop them off in the free library, and then tell her, I'm only going to bring back one. And there's a suspense because you go to the first one and you're tempted by Kurt Vonnegut. You're like, yeah, but what if there's a better one? well, I'll take this one to the next one. So in her mind, it's like swapping books. I'll take the Vonnegut to the next one and maybe swap it out. Anyways, it's focusing on fun. At the end of the run, she doesn't know if she did 2 miles or 12 miles, because she's stopping, she's looking at books, she's taking things out. And to me, like that's just genius. That's focusing on fun. And then she can't wait
Yeah.
to do it again. So that's it. Focus on the fun, man. And that's the secret to a lifetime of running.
I love that. I will share my version of your wife's strategy, which is collecting and foraging natural resources. I'm really into, identifying plants, and I'll run out my front door. We have this big open space park in front of our house, and I'll just forage different plants. Some of them are natural sun lotions, some of them are edible, some of them I use for crafts, and I'll come home and my pockets will be full of, tinder for the fire in the backyard, and then my other pockets full of like a little bit of food and just all these different little things that I'm going and collecting on my run, and that's one way I like to do it.
Genius. Genius.
Yeah.
And your mind is actively engaged nonstop. And you don't want the run to end because you think, oh, what if there's a little like jewel plant a little further on, or there's some mustard greens. If I just went another 50 yards. And so rather than the run, because most people on a run are focusing on like getting this thing over with. Like, oh, I get another mile to go. Yours is the opposite. Like, oh shit, if I end now, I'm missing out on some good stuff, man. That's genius. That's terrific.
That's right. That's the motto. Well, Chris, thank you so much for fighting through our scheduling difficulties and hopping on here with me. Um,
That was not an hour scheduling difficulty. That was a my scheduling difficulty. But thanks, Ryan. I appreciate it. Your
it's all
forgiveness
good.
for me screwing up.
Um, so if somebody's listening to this, what's a good place for them to learn more about, the different stories that you're telling, or what you've got going on?
Yeah, I'm pretty easy to find online. We have Born to Run World is a site that Eric and I created with a lot of video content and info about running form and approach to running. And yeah, I'm on Instagram, Twitter, so look around, and I'm usually popping up here or there.
Right on, man. Yeah. Well, next time you're in Denver or Colorado at large, let me know and we'll go and have a fun run sometime.
I would love that. Actually, Ryan, let's make that a bucket list item for the two of us. I would love to go on a foraging run for you with you. So no, let's stay in touch and keep banging that around to find a time and a place.
All right, man. Well, thank you so much for coming by, and thank you everybody for listening.
All right, Ryan. Thanks a lot, buddy.